This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Again, Erev Yom Tov, Agit Yar to everyone. There's an interesting chakira that we could investigate. The Mishnah says in Masechta Rosh Hashanah Chav Tes Amud Beis, Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah, that falls out on Shabbos, in the Beis HaMikdash they would blow, and not outside of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara is discussing, is it that we don't blow Midairaisa, is that we don't blow Midrabanan? So ultimately the Gemara says, really, there's a mitzvah Dairaisa to blow the shofar, and it's permitted to blow the shofar. And the Rabbanan were the ones who were geyser not to blow the shofar, like Rabbi said. Because Rabbi said everyone is chayiv in Tkiyah shofar, but not everybody knows how to blow. And there's a Gzeira, Shema, Yitzlena, Biyadai, V'yelech Eitzel Habaki. So there's a Gzeira Drabanan that you might come to carry the shofar Daled Amos in the Rishus Harabim. So there's a very interesting chakira. And the chakira is, when the Rabbanan said, don't blow the shofar, did they say, don't blow the shofar, and therefore we're oiker the mitzvah completely, and if you go ahead and you blow the shofar, you're not makayim the mitzvah? Or maybe they just exempt you from the mitzvah, but if you violated the Avera and you blew the shofar, you're Mekayim the mitzvah d'oraisa of Tkiyah shofar. In other words, when the Chachamim said don't do the mitzvah, did they say don't do it, and if you did it, you're not Mekayim anything? Or did they say don't do it and you don't have to do it, but if you do it, you're Mekayim a mitzvah? An interesting nafkamina would be what's brought in the tshuva of Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank in Or Chaim Chelak Beis Sivan Peches, that according to the poskim that hold that on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, you don't make a shechianu on Tkiyah shofar because you already made a shechianu on the first day, and it's a yoima arichta. That opinion would hold that if the first day of Rosh Hashanah is Shabbos, you certainly do make a shechianu on the second day. So according to that shita, let's say on the first day you decided you're going to ignore the takanas chachamim and you're going to blow the shofar and you're going to make a bracha and you're going to make a shechianu. Do you make a shechianu on the second day again? If you say the chachamim were oiker in the mitzvah lagamri and there was no kiyum ha-mitzvah on the first day and then the shechianu was a bracha levatala, so then certainly you would have to make another shechianu on the second day. However, we could be, according to the other tzad, that the Rabbanan were not oiker the mitzvah, they just told you don't do it, but if you did it, you're mekayim. So if you made a shechianu on the first day, it was effective, you would not have to make a shechianu on the second day. So this is a chakira that is addressed in the Sefer, B'shvilei HaSimcha of Reb Simcha Lieberman, Reb Simcha Bunim Lieberman. And this is a set of svarim that we've quoted from in the past. And this is actually a shaila that is discussed, as we'll see, by Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and it's discussed by Rabbi Chanan. But let's begin in this way. It would seem that this would be a machlekes amoraim, because Gemara in Bracha says on Yud Amud Beis, Beis Shammai says in the evening everyone should lean when they say Shema, and in the morning they should stand up, like the pasuk says, uveshachbecha uvkumecha. And Beis Hillel says, no, you read Kriya Shema Kedarka Shenemra V'lechta Chavadarch. So the question is, what if you follow Beis Shammai's opinion? We don't paskin like Beis Shammai. So Rabbi Cheskel says, Asa K'divrei Beis Shammai Asa K'divrei Beis Hillel Asa. Rabbi Yosef says, no, Asa K'divrei Beis Shammai Lo Yasa Klum. Because similarly we find that someone whose head and most of his body was in the sukkah and his table was in the house, Beis Shammai says, it's pasul, and Beis Hillel says it's kosher. So Beis Hillel said, we know the whole story, the Chachamim did that, and the Ziknei Beis Shammai didn't say anything, and Beis Shammai says, not true. They said to him, Imkein ha'yisanoyeg, like hiyamta mitzvah sukkah miyamecha. If you did that, you're not mekayim the mitzvah at all. And Tosfos says, according to Rabbi Yosef, that if you follow Beis Shammai and you lean when you say Shema, you didn't accomplish anything. That is, you're not mekayim the mitzvah even midoraisa, like the Gemara cites the example where the Ziknei Beis Shammai said to Beis Hillel, if you acted this way, you are not mekayim sukkah miyamecha. Likewise, you are not mekayim kriya shema. So it would come out that this is a machlokes between Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Cheskel. That Rabbi Cheskel says when the rabbis say don't do something, if you do it the way the rabbi said not to do it, they were oiker the mitzvah. And Rabbi Cheskel says, they were not oiker the mitzvah, and Rabbi Yosef says they were oiker the mitzvah. So certainly by Tkiyah Shofar or Natilas Lulav, if the rabbi said you're not to be Mekayim the mitzvah in the first place, not only don't do it this way, but don't do the mitzvah, if you did the mitzvah, l'chayra, you would not be yotzei. However, the Ran argues on Taisus, and the Ran and the Ritva say that when the Ziknei Beis Shammai said to Beis Hillel, Im kein ho'yisa noyeg lo kiyamta mitzvah sukkah miyamecha, lav davka, because it was a kosher sukkah. It just means, since we're worried you may get drawn into the house, you are not mekayim the mitzvah kara'oi or karatzin chachamim, like we say, kol shaloi amar shlosh advarim elu b'pesach la yatsi yedei chayvasai, which means you're chayva kara'oi, but certainly it's not ma'akev. However, so it would come out that according to Tosfos, if you blew the shofar on Rosh Hashanah that comes out on Shabbos, lo yatzei yedei chayvasai, and according to the Ran, perhaps, you would be yotzei your chiyuv. However, Rabbi Akiva Eiger comes and says that even according to Shitas HaTosfos, that in general, if you don't do the mitzvah the way the rabbi said, lo yatzei yedei chayvasai, says Rabbi Akiva Eiger in the Drush V'chidosh Ma'aracha Ches, the avsha avar al isra d'Rabbanan shegazru shaloi l'tkaya mikamakom holu midaraisa ika mitzvah l'tkaya af b'Shabbos kayim mitzvah shofar. Rabbi Akiva Eiger says you are mekayim mitzvah. By the way, in the shiur that we gave about the controversy in Jerusalem, how Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger wanted to reinstate the shofar, he was clearly working with Rabbi Akiva Eiger Shita, because he said even if there is an Avera, it's only on the Baal Toikeya, and everybody else would be Yotzei, so it's Kedai for him to violate the Avera, to might see everyone else. Clearly this is going with the tzad that you're Mekayim the mitzvah. But now the question we have to ask addresses Rev Simcha Bunim Lieberman. Why would Tkiyah Shofar be different? Why would it be that when it comes to other mitzvahs, Tosfos says, if you don't say Shema like Beis Hillel, if you don't sit in the sukkah properly, lo yatsi yedei chavasei klal, and when it comes to shofar, if you carry the shofar, and then if you, blow the shofar, you would be mekayim the mitzvah. So Rav Lieberman offers 5 chilukim between the scenario of shofar and the mitzvahs of Kriyat Shema and Sukkah. Number 1, Tkiyah Shofar on Shabbos. Since the rabbi said don't blow at all, and there's no way to be mekayim the mitzvah, it was not nicha b'einei chachamim to be oiker the mitzvah legamri, because then could the chachamim just uproot a mitzvah completely? As much as they would like to diminish uprooting the mitzvah, they certainly endeavor to. By Kriyat Shema, they said if you lean, you're not yet to the mitzvah, but they're not being oiker the mitzvah. You could be mekayim the mitzvah sitting up properly. They were not oiker the mitzvah legamri. But in this case, since they said not to blow on Shabbos, if they said it in a way where they be oiker the mitzvah, they're oiker the mitzvah entirely, they didn't want to do such a thing. But by Sukkah or Kriyat Shema, where they're just telling you how to do it, so if you do it the wrong way, they could be oiker it in that oifen, since there are still other oifanim with which to be mekayim the mitzvah. Number 2, you could say as follows. Really, in general, when the chachamim say not to be mekayim a mitzvah, they're oiker the mitzvah legamri. But not in this case. Because in this case, we know the chachamim said, blow the shofar in the mikdash, blow the shofar where there's a bezdin. So how would it look if they were oiker the mitzvah legamri, and yet there are scenarios where you're going to blow the shofar? So it looks a little bit kechucha v'tzlu, looks like a joke. So therefore they said, don't do it. If you did it, it has to be your mekayim, because otherwise how could it be sometimes you do blow, sometimes you don't blow? As opposed to by Shema, whenever you lean, you're not yotzei. Whenever it's roishe v'rubai b'sukkah v'shulchan v'techabayis, you're not yotzei. Another interesting idea is he quotes the Mishnas Chachamim of Maram Chagiz Ois Tav Kuf Lamed Ches. This is brought in the Gilyoni Hashasar of Rabbi Yosef Engel, that the Gzera of Shema Yavirenu Dalet Amis B'Shus Harabim is a Gzera Kaduma. It's a Gzera that was already decreed in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu. That being the case, since it's such a strong Gzera, the Chachamim did not have to bolster their Shita and strengthen it by saying, if you do it, you're not Mekayim the Mitzvah. But other Drabanans, namely leaning when you say Shema, or Rosh V'Ruba V'Sukkah V'Shulchan V'Techabayis, these are later Gezeres Chachamim, they had to bolster it by saying, and if you do it that way, La Yatsa Yidei Chayvasai. A fourth chiluk, says Reb Simcha Bunim Lieberman, the Gzera of Shema Yavirenu is a very general Gzera. It applies by many mitzvahs. It applies by Lulav. It applies by Megillah. But it applies by other Dairaisas. And since it applies by other Dairaisas, and it's an overarching Gezerah, the Chachamim didn't want to then go ahead and be Eiger so many mitzvahs. If it's a specific limited Gezerah, so under those circumstances, the Chachamim exercise their power of being Eiger Davar Min HaTorah. But if it's an overarching Isser, the Chachamim did not want to exercise such power. Another chiluk, a very beautiful chiluk, is as follows. When do the Chachamim say that if you don't listen to our legislation, you're not Yotzei the mitzvah? That's if the violation of the D'Rabbanan is incurred at the time of the observance of the mitzvah. You're leaning while you say Shema. You are sitting in the sukkah, v'shulchana v'techabayis. So the Chachamim said, if you're going to violate our Isser while you're being Mekayim in the mitzvah, we'll be Eiger the mitzvah lagamri. Ma'she'en kein by shofar. You're not violating the D'Rabbanan when you're blowing the shofar. We say don't blow the shofar because lest you come to carry, either before or after. So since it's not simultaneous to the observance of the mitzvah, under those circumstances, the Chachamim were not Eiger the mitzvah. So this would explain how even Lefi Shitas Tosfos, that in general, when the Chachamim are Eiger, Chachamim say not to do a mitzvah, they're Eiger the mitzvah lagamri. These are 5 chilukim of why it would not apply by the shofar. Either because by shofar, number 1, says Rabbi Lieberman, when it comes to Tkiyah Shofar, if they're Eikeret, they would be uprooting the mitzvah completely. Mashen came by Kriya Shema and Sukkah, you could be Mekayim it in other Oifanim. Number 2, Tkiyah Shofar is different because since anyway you're blowing it in Bezdin, it will look like a joke if you are Eikeret Lagamri. Number 3, it's an early Gezerah and does not need Chizuk. Number 4, it's an overarching Gezerah and it would apply to many mitzvahs and they didn't want to do so for many mitzvahs. And finally, number 5, that they were only Eiger the mitzvah if the violation of the D'Rabbanan was a time of the observance of the mitzvah and not at some other time. Okay, Mar Rabbi, so this is the sheet of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, that if a person did blow the shofar on Shabbos, in fact, Yatsa Yidei Chayvasai, and even so, we're makbid not to blow the shofar. Wishing everyone a gebench seyar, Akiva v'chasima taiva.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.